Welcome everyone to our craft webinar series called Indigenous Place and Arts. And today we have a very specific, a very interesting topic, and I think everybody will be very interested to listen to us. And next slide. This webinar is part of Craft Research Coordination Network that was created in collaboration between Navigating New Arctic Community Office, Working Group on Infrastructure Futures, and then RATIC initiative, and was initiated together with Arut-Sarar-Mute Native Council and Native Village of Mikaruk. So we have a lot of collaborators, and we hope that everybody can learn from each other and discuss issues of infrastructure from diverse perspectives. So you can have access to our webinar recordings that we have already 3 in the past on NNA Community Office YouTube channel. And also we have our Facebook group where you can also find those recordings. And we have scheduled 6 more webinars every first Monday of the month. You are very welcome to join us for those webinars. And today the host of this meeting is James Temte, and I will give him the floor to carry on this webinar.
Thanks, Farah. Yeah, so today we have a couple really special guests joining us. If you want to go a couple slides down. Well, a little bit about me. I work at Alaska Pacific University. I'm the Senior Director of Indigenous Research and Community Engagement. I'm a member of the Northern Cheyenne tribe, and so I grew up in Wyoming and Montana and Colorado, but I've moved up to Alaska about 15 years ago and just really fell in love with it and really enjoy the work that I get to do at APU. Also joining us today is Aaron Leggett. And so Aaron, he is the president-chief of the Native Village of Eklutna, and then senior curator of Alaska History and Indigenous Cultures at the Anchorage Museum, and works closely with the, he serves as an advisor to the Smithsonian Arctic Studies Center. One thing that I really appreciate about Aaron is the Eklutna tribe is on, Anchorage is on Eklutna land. And so he's the kind of the local chief. And so it's really an honor to have Aaron with us today. Also joined with Melissa Shaginoff. She's the Alaska specialist for outreach and engagement planning office at the National Museum of the American Indian at the Smithsonian Institution. And I've worked with Melissa for quite some time on and off with the different arts programming here in Anchorage and around Alaska. But she's a member of the Udzuzutsu, Caribou, and Sukchu Chukchuka fish eater clans from the Naidiana Na Kayaks Chicaloon village of Alaska, which is not too far from Anchorage. And she's a Atna and Paiute descent. So yeah, I just want to welcome both of them here today. And Melissa, sorry if I completely mispronounce those, but I always like to try. So I think first off, just given this, the topic at hand is I'd like to ask Melissa, if you don't mind giving a land acknowledgement for us. You've done a lot of work with land acknowledgements and run workshops and really appreciate it. So I was wondering if you'd be able to do that.
Sure. The Leokak, or Anchorage, is the ancestral homelands of the Dena'ina people. And, you know, land acknowledgement, it's interesting, like hearing the iterations land acknowledgement goes through, and, you know, this sort of work to make sure that it represents action rather than just a statement or, you know, something empty. And I think that that's proof by the work that James has done to bring Aaron and I in this space. We're on the federally recognized tribal lands of the Eklutna Dena'ina people. And so that's important to make sure that Dena'ina people are represented in every space in which, programs and events and discussions are being, held on their land. And it's important to not only include, but make space for the work, for the future, and, the recognition of the stewardship of the Dena'ina people of Dagoyakok of Anchorage. So I'll just say that. Shan.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. So I have a couple of videos that I'd like to share about place name and place and the importance of recognizing place in communities and Indigenous place specifically. So Vincent, do you have those videos, or I'm happy to share my screen too?
Yes, give me one moment. They're the ones linked into slides, correct?
Yes.
Wonderful. Let me just get that set up right here.
And so, yeah, we'll just watch the two videos, so kind of back to back, and then we'll have a question and answer and kind of a discussion.
So my grandmother, who was full-blooded Dena'ina, was born north of Anchorage, a place called Birchwood, about 15 miles. When she was born in 1933, Anchorage had a population of about 5,000. My mother was born a little further up the road, a little closer to the village, in 1957. Anchorage had a population of about 90,000. When I was born in 1981, Anchorage had a population of about 180,000. And today we're at 300,000. So in a few generations, we've seen Anchorage go from 5,000 to over 300,000. Place that I grew up in, this town, there was almost no recognition of the actual people whose homeland it was. And that always kind of bothered me. It was almost like we lived in the past or we didn't exist anymore.
Easy to almost skip past the term thousands of years because it's such a large number. I remind people that tribes and nations of indigenous people have been here since before Rome was a city.
Started working at the Alaska Native Heritage Center when I was 19, and that's when I first realized that even other indigenous people had no idea that this was a native place. And they would ask me, "Where's your native family from?" And I would say, "Well, we're from here." They said, "No, where's your village?" I said, "We're from here."
The Dena'ina are the original inhabitants of South Central Alaska, and we have 4 dialects that represent vast geographic differences.
I couldn't quite find the way of expressing how that felt until one day I read an article that was done in the early 1990s by one of our elders, Claire Swan. And Claire said that for a long time that we were the invisible people. We were invisible to outsiders, and by extension we became invisible to ourselves. When I read that quote, that's the moment in which I really understood what it was we were up against.
We don't have monuments, we don't have buildings, we don't have structures that have, changed the landscape. A really important Indigenous value is leaving something better than how you came upon it. Leaving it cleaner, more well taken care of, and safer than how you entered that space. We can learn from Indigenous knowledge systems of being here. But that first starts with acknowledging the Indigenous people and how their existence has affected this place. Looking at Alaska, it looks the way it is as wild and abundant, as beautiful, because Indigenous people have touched the land, because they've cared for it, because they have been here for thousands of years. Land acknowledgement is about change, and it's about truth, and it's a way to see each other. And at its core, it's a gesture to thank Indigenous people for their continued care and stewardship.
So with Julie Decker, our museum director, we came to the realization, the museum as an institution came to the realization that for us to grow as a community, the museum really needed to be one of those institutions leading the charge to increase public awareness for the Dena'ina, because it's such an important cultural institution in our city and our state. For us, I guess, to take that stand, I think is both, on the one sense, a radical step, but also the right thing to do.
I mean, it is our job to understand, or to try to understand why this is important, and to honor Indigenous histories and to honor Indigenous futures. It starts in communities, it starts with individuals, and then we need institutions to embrace it and to lead the way forward. And without that, you don't have systemic change.
Land acknowledgement can be something that people shy away from because they're worried that it will be insincere, or they won't do it right, or they'll pronounce something wrong. And you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because this gesture is about trying. It's about making a statement so you can move towards change.
It brings our past to the future. It brings our ancestors into play. It brings thousands of years of living inhabitants into the present.
You take that first step, and then you go to the next step, and you go to the next step, and it becomes a circle of movement, of recognizing and including Indigenous people in that story.
Living, breathing places that people become a part of over these thousands of years.
But for others to acknowledge that, it's so special. And it gives me that confidence and that validity that my culture is important, that I'm important, and that my language is important.
We've made tremendous progress. Things that I thought were going to take maybe 50 years, we've done in less than 15.
The new Dena'ina Civic and Convention Center in Anchorage is going to open in the fall of 2008.
And I'm optimistic. Most people are of good faith, and if they understand the circumstances and the history in a more accurate way, a deeper way, then we're going to have a better future for our next generations.
The land is imprinted on us, and we're imprinted on the land here, and we hope that people can understand that and can go out and appreciate this place with a new level of respect. Yep. Yep.
The next video, which is about Indigenous place names and a project that has been ongoing in the Anchorage region.
Weli Jan and Sarotta Melissa Shaginoff at the land. Udishuath Koikara Atlan, Night Diniana Kayak Sinsiarin. I am Caribou and Fish Eater clan from Night Diniana, or the Log Over the River, or Chickalin Village. The symbol chosen for the Indigenous Place Names project was the fire bag, because Dolye, which in Dena'ina means in it are things. Because Dolye is really a symbol of strength and survival for the Dena'ina people. It was an object that was very special because of the materials it was made from and because of who it was bestowed upon.
The Dena'ina name for this area, for the creek, is Chanchnu. Chanchnu means grass creek. When the early map makers came through this area, they probably encountered a Dena'ina fish camp, and they asked the Dena'ina, what do you call this area? We said Chanchnu. They said Chester. We said, close enough. So there was no old Manchester or some homesteader that had whiskey still on the creek or something. So the Dena'ina name Chanchnu is really how Chester Creek got its name.
My name is Michael Fredericks. I'm the president of SALT, and we've been working on the Indigenous Place Names project for some time now. It's a really important project because it's one of the first times where we're recognizing important Dena'ina places here in the municipality of Anchorage. And it's not just important because we're putting up signs, it's really, about changing an idea of what history is. So Mount McKinley wasn't renamed to Denali just with a sign. It's about a process of acknowledging a different history, a longer history of who was really here before colonization. And to me, it's so important for identity, because not only our identity as individuals, but Alaska's identity. Because, when I was growing up, Indigenous people weren't really honored in those ways. And in fact, there was a lot of shame involved with being an Alaska Native person. I remember being a little girl with my father, being ushered out of stores with him because people felt like he was not supposed to be there as a Native person. There's a real change in consciousness about working on a project where you're exalting and acknowledging Indigenous culture from when I was growing up, and that was only 40 years ago. So here today, I have a 9-year-old who he sees today Native words everywhere, at the museum, in the parks now. He's so proud to be a Native person, and that's so different from the reality that I had. And I'm just so excited to be a part of that, to making this new generation of tiny Indigenous people very proud of who they are.
So the real turning point in recognition for the Dena'ina was in 2006 to testify on what the name for the new Civic and Convention Center downtown should be. To me, the most logical choice, instead of naming it after an individual, was to name it after the Indigenous people of this area, the Dena'ina. After providing testimony to a committee that had been put together, it went to the Anchorage Assembly where it was passed unanimously. And that's why today in downtown you have the Denina Civic and Convention Center. After the naming of the Denina Civic and Convention Center, there was a lot more interest in trying to figure out who the Denina were. And I've been honored to work on a wide variety of projects that have worked to increase public recognition for the Denina as well as land acknowledgements.
It's really exciting to see where this project is going because it's moving from a signage project to a movement.
Denina Eklutna Titiguk. You are walking on Denina land.
I'm Beth Nordland, and I'm walking on Denina land.
Melissa and Aaron for joining us for this conversation. And both of you were really instrumental in the development of those two videos and this movement here in Anchorage. I just kind of want to start us off with just a couple questions, and maybe we'll start with you, Aaron. I guess with like the place naming and the project, but also your work with the Denina Center and just in general in Alaska, with the place name project, what was your role and why did it matter to you?
It was an outgrowth of some work that had been done after the naming of the convention center. There were some interpretive panels that were put on a number of the parks. That's when I first started working with the Park Foundation. And then around, I think, 2017, I was contacted again by Beth Nordland. Beth Nordland, you saw her in the video, the director of the Anchorage Park Foundation, about how could we expand this out. And the timing was perfect because I was getting a lot of requests from different organizations that were interested in doing this, but I could see that there was a need to coordinate. Everybody seemed to think that they had this original idea of, oh, I want to do some Denina place names. And so we brought together a committee, really a who's who of community partners from about 24 supporting organizations and leadership. And we kind of brainstormed what this would look like, what would be the key success factors, what would it take? And we knew that it was going to be a massive undertaking. And ultimately, we identified 32 locations throughout the municipality of Anchorage, and we kind of prioritized them in the first 10 or so that had the most visibility. In other words, kind of how could we get our biggest bang for our buck? We had a little bit of initial funding, and we knew we could probably install, with the funding that we had, the first 3 or 4, which is exactly what we did. And then we got some really good local coverage and some national coverage. And then what really blew the door open was in 2022, during Alaska Native American Heritage Month, we got coverage in the Washington Post, in the Sunday edition of the Washington Post. I ended up getting on the front page, below the crease, not above the crease. So that's my next goal, is to get above the crease in the Washington Post. Anyways, then that put us on the radar with the Mellon Foundation, and they contacted us in early 23 and then worked with us. And in the fall of 23, we got word that they wanted, through their Monuments project, to fund the entire project to the tune of about $1.5 million to make this whole thing a reality, and that we had the next 4 years to make it happen. And so in addition to the signage, there's an education component, websites, maps and collateral, But really the key things are that it's meaningful to the Dena'ina, that it's impactful, that it's well built, it's meant to last, and that it really makes a statement.
Aaron. And yeah, Melissa, I guess, why is the project, what was your role, and then why is it important to you?
Yeah, so I came on to the project. So first off, Aaron's my cousin. That tells you something a little bit about how related Dena'ina and Ahtna people are in this area. So my role was the artist. So I designed the fire bag, piece for all the signs that are going up. And I wasn't the first artist part of the program or part of the place name project. Joel Isaac, who is also probably a distant relative and one of my best friends who I grew up with from here in Kenai. He started off with coming up with the concept, I think, along with the advisory committee, that they wanted a fire bag represented. And then I was brought on to design it and then also to kind of shepherd it a little bit. I came on as the designer, but then I created a fire bag that now lives at the Heritage Center. And then I've been a part of a lot of the discussions, sort of like shaping what it looks like in the future, and also serving like in supportive roles as Aaron and sort of cultural sort of work. I think like when I joined it, it was I had just ended a contract with the Anchorage Museum. I was curating there, and I was just sort of kind of free, and was asked to, if I wanted to step in as the artist, and I really didn't know what I was kind of stepping into. And then as it became clear that it was a larger movement, of making Indigenous people and Dena'ina people more visible in Anchorage, in NNA-CO, which is, such an important thing to me. I think that, Dena'ina, Dene, Athabascan sort of aesthetic as like who we are, what does our art look like? What does our culture look like? How is it lived? I think sometimes gets, like many places, urban places, gets lost, right? And Alaska, has this sort of reputation as being this, frontier, right? And I think what's, a radical sort of other side to that is to recognize that Alaska is really not this new place or the last of anything. It's actually a very old place, and Indigenous place names really tell you a lot about the Dena'ina people, their worldview, and then also how like attuned and the depth of knowledge that they had of every inch of this land. You go just like in this area, and Aaron could probably tell you more about the numbers, but there's so many place names, and our place names are descriptive. They're related to what it looks like, to what it was used for. And then of course there's also older stories for things like that too. And that tells you, how deep our relationship is with this place. And I think that I think in the first video, I said something like, we don't have monuments or we don't have, structures, because it's a Indigenous value to, leave a place better than you found it, right? Which, to some people seems untouched, but like our history and like the proof of our existence, lies in the oral tradition of place names and of knowing the exact use of these landmarks, that are now being created with the place name project. And so, yeah, it means a lot to me because it's proof of our history. It is our history books, and it is something that, as if people really wanted to steward the land, really wanted to, live connected to the land, that they are on, place names is such an important sort of aspect to that, and making that visible and accessible to the entire community of Degoyakok, of Anchorage, Indigenous people and settler people alike, is a movement I want to be part of. So.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. I just think it's so neat too how you incorporated, it could have just been signs, but you incorporated the arts, which tell more about the people and like the care and the story behind the fire bag. It's just really powerful. It's just it's very indigenous. It's like very holistic and yeah, grounded in values. Um, So I think the next question is, why should this type of work matter to like architects and city planners, folks like that? What would you say to them? And we'll start with you, Aaron. And like, how could they be involved more, not only with this project, but similar projects?
Why do I think it matters to designers and architects? Well, I think it's reflective of the place. I think it creates a unique identity, and it's also shows respect to the place. You know, I think it's important to do it not in an extractive way. You know, I think sometimes designers and architects think, oh, well, you know, I can be inspired by these designs and I'll just go do my own thing and create my own logos or aesthetic and not consult with the actual indigenous people. And then you end up with sort of a bastardized form of that, you know. And it's not really that entirely, it's probably better than nothing, but it can be sometimes viewed as rather offensive or extractive. But I think when it's done well, it's really pretty powerful. You know, a good example of that sort of, I would say, you know, look at the difference between the Seattle Seahawks logo versus what Alaska Airlines has done working with Crystal Whirl on her murals on several of their airplanes. Those are very different processes, but they both sort of feature these Northwest Coast designs. But one clearly has a history and a meaning behind it, and the other one is just a copy of a mask that exists in the Burke Museum. Now, it's slightly ironic that Alaska Airlines, of course, is one of the biggest sponsors of the Seattle Seahawks, but we'll leave that aside for the moment.
Yeah. How about you, Melissa? What are your thoughts on, you know, the role that architects and city planners and like why it should matter to them?
Well, I think that a really important sort of aspect of the design of anything is to know its current like use and to know it's the history of use there too, right? Because everything is contextual. You know, it's like, you know, putting a building or putting a airstrip on like on a you know a traditionally used like fish campsite, you know, might be a bad idea. It might not be like solid ground or things like that. And I think that you know, paying attention to that history and, you know, the longest history, you know, of use in this area is the indigenous use of this area, you know, and so learning about the place names, learning about how this place was used is so important, right? I know that there's some places that are like translated to, you know, that they talk about like the solidness of ground, right? You know, of the fact that like we've been handling earthquakes for thousands and thousands of years, right? It's like all that information is an important sort of thing in the planning and the designing of something. And then also I think that it's important, and this isn't always something that we see in Western society, is to honor kind of like what happened on those lands, right? And, you know, we see that in a Western way through like monuments or, you know, statues of men somewhere. And that doesn't quite honor the really longer history or, you know, the history of use in a communal way, the way something has been used over and over again by a group of people. And yeah, so I think that it gives you some context, you know, to where you're going to be and where people are going to be working and moving and, you know, living their lives. And I think that bears some time to take in considering, you know, how you build or how you utilize that space.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. So my last question for you before we open it up for just other general questions is, how have you seen the community respond to this type of work? And we can start with you, Aaron.
How have I seen the community respond? Well, I think there's been an excitement, generally speaking. I think people are starting to embrace these names. You know, I start to hear the Indigenous names for these places a lot more than I ever did, you know, growing up, certainly. I think people are supportive of the overall project. They can't wait to see what it looks like when it's all done. You know, there's some really adventurous people that can't wait for them all to get installed so they can like try to go to every single one of them, which we are going to be putting up some that are rather kind of remote by most people's standards. So I think they're looking forward to that. I think from the local tourism and just general downtown Anchorage wayfinding, there's excitement there of how can we market these to visitors to really brand our city. Those are the kinds of things I guess I've seen.
Great, thanks. What about you, Melissa?
Can you repeat the question? Like, what's the...
How have you seen the community respond?
Oh, yes.
And I
Okay.
think part too, like, I know Michael Fredericks in one of the films, she's just thought about her own kids growing up and seeing it. But what have you seen?
Well, you know, as far as like my art practice in Anchorage is like, I do a lot of like community sort of facilitation and discussions. You know, I like to say like, you know, visiting as an art practice. Can it be an art practice just to talk with people? But I think that like a lot of people are talking about this, right? It's like, I think, you know, one of the, you know, really important sort of aspects of Aaron's work and my own work is making visible sort of Indigenous history, Indigenous people, right? And seeing our language out there, you know, it has an impact. And so I feel like I see people, you know, looking for resources and trying to find, you know, places online where they can, you know, learn how to pronounce something, right? Which is something that they did, you know, with the Parks Foundation. Aaron recorded, you know, the pronunciation of every sign that's going to be going up, right? Which is so important. And, you know, I had a 6-month like Eklutna and Dena'ina class out of my studio, and it was full. And now we have a website too that is even more sort of like language. And I think that is like it's just very special to see the community so engaged and excited about this, right? And it's also, I think when it come down to it, right, it's like it's all about sort of free community education, right? And it's so generous, you know, to offer our culture in that way, you know, to be, you know, people who want people to learn about us, right? Because it makes all of us better, you know, it makes all of us be able to live here better, to understand the land better, and also understand Indigenous worldview. And I think that in my experience, there's been a lot of excitement around it, and I can only sort of speak to that based on people's interest in classes, people's interest in all sorts of like language-based things. My aunties, my Aunt Sandra, you know, started an occupational certificate in Dena'ina and Eklutna at the University of Alaska Anchorage, and their classes are full, and they, you know, graduate, you know, like 20 people, like every couple years, you know, in an occupational certificate in Dena'ina and Eklutna, meaning that it's like a certificate on top of whatever degree they're getting, right? So it is because of work like this, right? Because, you know, we are saying that this is actually an important sort of thing for all of us to learn and all of us know. And it's not just an Indigenous sort of knowledge, right? It's not just us learning about ourselves. It's us learning about ourselves and sharing it with other people. And I think that particularly in times like this, that's a really important way of being, because it's about understanding each other, you know, and it's very humanistic, I think.
Great. Thank you, Melissa. And I know you have to jump off a little early, so just stay as long as you can, but no pressure. But I'd like to open it up to see if anyone else has any questions for Aaron or Melissa, or has comments or thoughts.
I can start.
Okay.
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for these wonderful presentations and films. It's really a wonderful example how Indigenous ways of knowing can be incorporated in the city. And our project is focusing on infrastructure. And here we see how both visible and invisible infrastructure, soft and hard, are brought into the city through signage, through education, through maps, everything, and how creativity and arts are getting part of this building, I would say, new identity of the city that is beneficial not only for Indigenous communities, but for everybody who lives in Anchorage. So it's a unique example. And I was just wondering if you could give us some advice on what other parts of infrastructure could be also indigenized the same way as you did with parks and with place names.
Well, again, I think tying it into wayfinding maps of your city, of you know, tourism collateral, getting it out in front of people, in you know, things that they're going to see if they come to visit the place. So maybe like a video at the airport, those kinds of things. You know, they're not just in parks, obviously. You know, I'm very fortunate in the place that I work, having such a strong commitment with the Anchorage Museum. So I think in other communities, you know, building strong partnership with the local museum or cultural center, all those things. I think, you know, it's not just in parks or in the traditional places. It's, you know, how do those things go into buildings and into, you know, lived infrastructure as well.
I would say that education systems, you know, is important. You know, it's making requirements, you know, that people have, you know, if you're in Alaska studies, right? If you are, you know, I see that we're from all over, you know, in the chat here, but, you know, taking it upon yourself to self-educate, right? You know, to do the time to, you know, take research to know whose land you're living on, and then also take it a step further and like assess sort of like where you are in your own sort of cultural knowledge of the Indigenous people of that place, right? And take on that responsibility to, you know, to assess where you are in that learning, you know, and then to continue forward, whether it's in language, whether it's, you know, taking an art class, whether it's supporting local artists, you know, whether it's, I also think too that, like, you know, we're all in different sort of sciences, you know, in this room, you know. I think that to looking at it as allies or as Indigenous people ourselves, as like our responsibility, you know, to make sure that local Indigenous people are included at every step of the way. You know, if you're having you know, an anthropology conference I saw in here. I saw some people are in social sciences. If you're having meetings about these things, that it's actually your responsibility, you know, to make sure that Indigenous people are included or mentioned when it concerns them, which of course it concerns them because you're living on their land, you know. So I know that seems a little flippant to say, but I can't tell you how many conferences or meetings or things that I've been part of where we just aren't even considering that, right? In this sort of larger group or whatever discussion we're talking about, right? And I think that it's about, you know, including other perspectives and making sure other perspectives are heard and included in the room. And, you know, it's a low bar to do a land acknowledgement. I was like, it's a high bar to make your work collaborative, you know, and aim for the high bar.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for maybe like one more question.
If I may, yes, thank you really very much for 3 presenters, and I'm very happy to see again you, James, and Aaron. We met last July when we were visiting Anchorage with our ARCA project about bicultural heritage, and even back then and now we learned more about those powerful, wonderful projects that you have, this place naming project, which I think is really, really important. And glad to hear that you have lots of interest, and you mentioned that you also have lots of collaborators and support coming from different actors. So I hope you do, and I was wondering, what are your next plans with this project? Are you, are you planning to do kind of more in that respect? Do you have any particular kind of plans how to continue that process? Because that seems to be an important but long-term process that needs efforts and I guess funding and involvement and on different sides.
Yeah, right now we're in the midst of sort of doing what we said we're going to do. We have 4 years to make it happen. So for example, for the first 3 years, we did about 1 sign a year. This year, we're going to be putting in, I think, 12 signs. So that's a massive amount of coordination and permitting and you know, the content, writing the content for it, and then figuring out the celebrations and how we do that. But I think also we're starting to look at how do we integrate this into creating educational curriculum and materials, and and tourism. We're just in the sort of the beginning stages of that part of it, but it's written into the grant, and I think it's a very critical component. And so my hope is that we're going to start that process here soon, with multiple community collaborators to really put out a world-class product that people can be proud of.
I did a class with my aunties, with Sandra Shaginoff Stewart, Carrie Shaginoff, and Danita Slauson, who's not my auntie, but I've known her my whole life. And yeah, it was we basically focused the class on the connections between Dena'ina and Eklutna people, and it was a very basic language class, and we came up with a little book, which I still have to give Aaron a copy, but it's basically like a brochure for language. It's very, very sort of, you know, rudimentary kind of alphabet, and, you know, hello, goodbye, conversational language, introduction language, and then some weather and season language. But you know, that's sort of a lot of the work that I've been doing, because I was doing those classes and we had, you know, 29 people sign up in 2 minutes. And then we had 29 people at every class for 6 months, you know, which was really exciting to see that people committed to it like that. So I dropped the link in there. If you want to see what we did, there's a downloadable sort of copy of the language in there. It's certainly not perfect. And if Aaron looks at it, he's going to find mistakes, but it's also kind of, you know, everybody's learning and everybody's at a different stage in their learning, including our teachers, you know, but I was really lucky to work with to work with them and the community that came. So yeah, I think there's language projects coming up every, all the time. So how we support those and also create accessibility to, somebody who can't commit to a college credit class, how can they access language?
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing.
Yeah, that is great work. Thank you for all that you both do for the Dena'ina people and just helping to raise visibility of Indigenous people, especially in urban areas. I think that's really, really important. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah, we can just share a slide about our next meeting, that everyone is welcome to attend our next webinar on 7th of April on infrastructure mapping with AI. It will be led by Wen Lee, with panelists Bessie Weston, Chandi Visarana, and Elias Manas. And then if you are coming to Boulder, Colorado, Arctic Science Summit Week, we have a couple of community meetings and a session based on our infrastructure research. And we keep planning on our knowledge sharing gathering in Bethel in the fall of 2025. And March 31st, we have joint webinar with GW and the MAST project for measuring urban sustainability in Arctic cities, and it's called Arctic Women Leadership, Addressing Climate, Political and Economic Transitions, Local, Federal and Indigenous Perspectives. So if you are interested, please let me know, and I will share Zoom link, but also we will share it in our infrastructure group. Thank you so much. Thank you, James. I think it was wonderful.
Good, I do too. I think, yeah, just it was a shift from the mural work, but I think it's doing the same thing. It's just raising visibility of local Indigenous people and history and language. I love it.